It's been nearly a century since the first commercial matching of music to picture in The Jazz Singer starring Al Jolson. The sync industry has grown quite a bit since then and hasn't done so without a few pains. Here to take us through some of the most important fundamentals is Jonathan McHugh, producer, director and founding member of the Guild of Music Supervisors, and the SVP of Global Platform Sales at Songtradr, Nick Woolard. I'm so pleased to have you both on the show. Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Hey,
You're
Vic.
welcome. Hi. So do you want to let us know where you're calling in from today, Nick?
I'm calling in from London in the UK. It's just got dark, which is a nice sign of the time of year.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your commitment here. And Jonathan?
I'm in lovely Santa Monica, California today, where it is a gorgeous day in the neighborhood.
It always is, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Well, Jonathan, look, I was reading through your long list of achievements on IMDb. It's very impressive. And apart from the roles that I just mentioned, you're also an actor, right?
Nah, I wouldn't really say that. I have made cameos in a couple films, but I would not call myself an actor.
Well, this is going to spoil my next bit, but I noticed that you're uncredited in the 97 film, The Sixth Man, and I wanted to give you a chance to correct this terrible injustice. What was the role?
Well, that role was actually a great one. That was, for anybody who's familiar with college basketball, one of the legendary teams is called the Georgetown Hoyas from Georgetown University, and they had a legendary coach named John Thompson, and I was cast as his assistant coach. And that film starred Marlon Wayans and Kadeem Hardison. It's kind of like Disney-type movies like Angels in the Backcourt type of thing. And I played the coach, and I had two lines, one of which was, yeah, and the other was, oh. But yes, that was some fine acting. I do have to say that that was pretty fine work on my part.
Okay, so when we do an acting show, what I'll do is I'll bring you on and you can tell us all about the prep for those two lines.
Yeah, so I will basically go intimate into the detail of method acting, what it takes to execute that.
All right. Well, so of course we're talking about sync licensing today, and I was hoping that maybe we can start with you, Jonathan. Just some cliff notes on how you started and got into the sync licensing space.
Sure. I started producing soundtracks for films when I was at A&M Records in the early 90s, and I did records like Empire Records, and I had some big soundtracks. And then I moved from there to Music Supervisor, and the guy who you just mentioned, Randy Miller, who cast me in that role, I was music supervising that film. And so I just started as kind of, I wanted to learn the game, and I learned how to music supervise, and part of obviously knowing how to music supervise is not just picking records. That's the fun part. The music licensing part, dealing with all the publishers and labels and managers and everything you have to do to get licenses done, is the laborious, intricate details that without that there is no, clearances. So you have to have that done. So being as I was the guy at the time at A&M Records, I guess just after they bought by Universal, who was licensing out, in other words, you're the record label, and so you're always the guy who's clearing things and approving things. So I learned licensing on the record company side first, and then working independently after that, then you learn, the other side of how that works.
Amazing. And Nick, what about you? Do you have some acting tips for us, or do you want to get straight into the sync licensing?
I was an extra on a friend's film once, but obviously had no words. But I tried acting with my eyes, tried to look surprised as a fight rumbled down a tube carriage. But I don't think that the scene ever made the cut. So my acting career had a very short stop. But I actually had a different entry point into sync licensing compared to Jonathan. So my background was in production music, which for anyone that doesn't know is music that's commissioned and written specifically for media use. So I was part of the team that grew Audio Network, which is quite a big UK, now international production music library. I joined there in 2007. And it was one of the first libraries of its kind to run a subscription business. So interestingly, we kind of had a different entry point into the discussions. It was very much about the licensing and about clearance of terms. But then ultimately, as the business grew and the size and the profile of the customers we worked with grew, it kind of opened up many more opportunities to actually start entering in more of a creative discussion with those production companies and ad agencies, etc. So I've worked across pretty much all of the global markets that have had kind of major TV commissions. The last role I was there, oversaw a team of around 40 people that were licensing and providing that creative input across productions.
Wow, that's a lot of people. So I'm sure anyone can Google this, and everyone probably has, but it's not every day that you get to hear this from the mouths of those who actually make it happen. I wanted to ask you both, what is a sync license?
Nick?
I did actually Google it just to make sure that my understanding was correct. I thought that it would be sensible just to double check. There's probably two definitions of a sync license. There's a sync license, which I guess most people would refer to. It's licensing music for the purpose of synchronization, normally with audiovisual content. Sometimes there are some edge cases like licensing it for a podcast where you're synchronizing to other audio, for example. In reality, a sync license in technical terms actually relates to clearing the publishing of a track, so the synchronization of the composition, so the melody or the lyrics, whereas clearing the sound recording is actually a master use license. Having said that, in 15 years of working in the business, I don't think I've ever heard it's separated out. It may be that that's partly to do with my background of working in production music, but I would always refer to a sync license as being the kind of combination of both the publishing and the master.
Well, you're right. They are very different, and both of them are needed to license any piece of music. You can't have the master without the sync, and vice versa. But Nick's right in the sense that the concept of the sync license has been generically grouped into both, when most times they're very separate.
Yeah, great. So now I wanted to cover a few terms that are regularly used in the industry, and for anyone who's likely to come across them if they're dealing in sync. Micro license or micro sync.
Nick?
So
I can see how this is going to go.
This is another one where I think that the definitions can vary a little bit. So my understanding of micro licensing was always mainly in the kind of YouTube online space, where it refers to very small incremental payments that aggregate up over a large user base. That being said, I think there's other people would refer to that as any kind of form of low cost, high volume licensing. So even kind of entering into the space of production music, that has in parts been referred to as micro licensing. Although I would say that the true definition is kind of much smaller incremental payments.
How about needle drop?
Jonathan, you can have
that one, Nick. Needle drop's a term I actually hate. It sounds like such a icky kind of thing, but it's basically just a song playing in a scene. And for some reason, people still use that term. It's just like, it's not literally someone dropping a needle. They refer to it generically as just a kind of a song playing in a scene. It can be, I guess, literally, you could literally have someone putting the record arm on a record, but it's literally just that nature of a song playing in a scene, and it's dropped in there without, like, the word is, I guess, when it says drop, it feels like it wasn't curated, it wasn't cared for, it just dropped in there, and that is not the case for most times.
All right. Do you agree, Nick? Anything to add, or shall we move on?
Only thing to add is that it's a term that I don't hear that often in the UK. Like, it does seem to be more US centric, although randomly it was also something that came up a lot in Scandinavia. So I don't know whether that's a kind of reflection on the wider world, but certainly not something that's referred to regularly here in the UK market, to my knowledge.
Oh, interesting. So what's the UK counterpart, or is there one?
I always used to call it one-off licensing, but again, that may be bias of the world that I inhabited for 10 years.
Okay, perfect segue, because the next question is one stop. What does that mean?
I'll take that one, Nick. One stop is incredibly important to music supervisors because it basically means that, much like we talked about how there's a sync license or a master license needed, the goal is always to simplify our jobs. And if we can find what's called one stop, it means that the publishing and the master owner are owned by the same source, and you can license them directly from one party. That's why music libraries win a lot of in our world, because we know that we can just make one call and it's done. You don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to track down the 8 writers on that song. You can't find one. They're on vacation in the Bahamas. They can't be reached. And, they have 5%, and anywhere from 1 to 5, any percent can stop a license from happening. So the aspects of one stop, people that control both sync and master, are incredibly important for what we do because of the ease of use, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for those of us who are unfamiliar, and I know this is a big question, but tell us how the licensing process generally works.
Nick, your turn.
I think it really depends on the nature of the project, the nature of the piece of music or the pieces of music. So I could probably answer from a kind of more of a blanket clearance perspective. My background was working mainly with big agency networks or big international broadcast groups. In those cases, there would normally be a set of economic and legal conditions that would establish who the preferred music partners were for a significant proportion of the content that was produced. So the kind of terms and rights of which that music was used would often be negotiated up front. So there'd be, established rate cards, preferred vendors, etc. Then obviously there would be more of the creative decision that was normally kind of pushed down to individual production teams, etc. I'm assuming that in Jonathan's world that might be slightly different, and that there may be more of a kind of negotiation on a case-by-case basis. Jonathan, be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, basically, the licensing process starts with the ability to send out a clearance to publishers, master owners, library, whatever it is, for something that you're looking for. Then you sometimes will quote a price that you want to pay, or sometimes you'll just put it out there. I like to quote prices I want to pay based on knowing the budget that I have, and can negotiate a little bit if so be it. But so then the back and forth happens with the licensor and the licensee to figure out if that's something that we can afford to use. And then once that rest letter's out and the confirmation that comes back that they can confirm that price, then the next process is, once it is actually placed in the show, then either depending on who, if it's a major label or publisher, then they will deliver a license. And a lot of times, if it's an independent project, the publisher or master owner want to get paid beforehand, and then once that payment is made, then they will issue a license. If it's not, then a license will be forthcoming. So it's a very consuming process. In between that process of confirmation letter, a request letter, then normally you'll send a confirmation letter requesting a license and information for payment. Once that confirmation letter is confirmed by the owner, then the actual licensing process will start. So, in a way, it's really a 3-step process to deliver the licenses.
Yeah, and this is a really good point to ask maybe you, Jonathan, for anyone who wants to get into sync as a career choice, how would you get started?
Well, again, sync and music supervision are 2 different things. There's a huge sync industry around music supervision. So, and there's a lot of jobs in that field that, from publishers to master owners to libraries to management companies. Some have now film and TV divisions that, try to find an internship with one of those companies or with a music supervisor. It's always better to do that, get in early as an intern, and then you'll basically be in. It's really one of those things. If you can get in and show what you're made of, and you understand the concepts and are willing to put in the time and energy and detail, to be incredibly both, very creative, but also very detail oriented on the licensing side. So to find, there's always job openings, not always job openings, not in this world, but before this world, there was always job openings and people always moving around and trying to find out better opportunities as they move up the ladder and they go to a bigger company or take a bigger position in a smaller company. So it's all about, you kind of just have to do the research and kind of be in it to win it, so to speak.
Yeah. Nick, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question earlier when I read your notes. The majority of the people that I know that work in the sync space, in fact, the majority of people that I know that work in the music space, never really had a clear sense of like, I wanted to do this specific role. They've always had a passion for music and they've always probably engineered opportunities to work in the space. But it does feel like the specifics of these roles have come about much more organically. And so I think that maybe things are changing now in so much of the kind of the market. And it's obviously maybe more people are aware that this opportunity exists. This is a specific thing. But yeah, I would still hope that there's a degree of that kind of just happy coincidence of how people kind of find their way into this space. And it's ultimately driven by being able to demonstrate their passion for music.
So it's got nothing to do with ear size and shape.
Probably
no
not.
takers. So let's talk about the artists for a while. What are the best ways for artists and composers to get set up for licensing their music for sync?
That is a huge question, and there's no real right answer to it. I think part of it would be to, as independent artists out there, to find an organization like Songtradr or other libraries that might want to take on unsigned artists to represent them, or to find a third-party pitcher. There's many of them out there in the world, and there are ones that we use that we love and that we respect, and that we're always going to be sure that we can go to them and they can guarantee that music is going to be 100% clearable. So I think the better you're better off if you have relationships with those kind of people and those kind of outfits where, your music is vouched for, if you will, because, as supervisors out there, we don't want to take a chance necessarily on saying, yes, there's no samples. Like I cleared, it's 100% cleared, but we don't really know you. We don't have that relationship to the trust level for, that's a really big thing, that trust level. And that's why to have a bona fide outfit like Songtradr or somebody like that is really effective for us to be able to get that comfort level.
Yeah, and I hear it all the time. It's all about long-term relationships. So if you're entering into the industry, just be in it for the long game. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so fundamentally, I agree with the position around intermediaries. Like trying to work as an individual artist into the space would be very difficult in most cases, unless you've already got a pre-existing network to tap into. I think the only thing that I would add is around just doing due diligence on those intermediaries. There are so many companies that offer these types of service, whether it's libraries or sync agencies. And there are some really great ones, but there's also not great ones, both in terms of, their terms, the way they're set up, how successful they're likely to be in terms of getting those placements. So I think for any artist who's, ultimately taking their works, their creative endeavors to market, doing that upfront due diligence on the partners you want to work with is incredibly important.
Yeah, great tips, both of you. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll be back shortly with more. Back now with our special guests, Jonathan McHugh and Nick Woolard, to help set us straight on the fundamentals of sync licensing. Jonathan, every music supervisor I know is tremendously busy, but I would imagine would love to discover that next incredible new sound. How can unknown artists best become discovered by you?
I think you just got to get yourself out there and put your music everywhere. Finding undiscovered talent is obviously something we all love to do. As we talked about earlier, if they're coming from trusted sources, that obviously helps out. But, there's no right answer here. It's a needle in a haystack thing to find artists and get them synced up and things. So it's really just about how can you connect with as many people as possible, get your music as heard by as many people as possible, and just continue to push out. I mean, the one thing I will say, if you're ever reaching out to music supervisors, you better make sure that you've done your research, that you know exactly what shows they're working on. You now know exactly what vibe of music is in those shows. Because if you send something to a supervisor and you say, hey, I love, here's my music, I think it would be great for this, but you haven't really listened to that or watched that show and know what that music is. And if you're off base and it looks like you didn't even do the research, your email won't even be read or read quickly and disposed of. So, you really have to make sure that you know what you're doing. It's a lot of time and energy to be able to find the right people doing the right shows and try to get to them. And most of them won't respond because they're so ridiculously busy and they can't really engage with strangers. So I think that idea of having that third-party clearance or working with a team like Songtradr will really be beneficial to you.
There you go. The sound agrees. Nick, what do you think?
I think it comes down to the fundamentals of building an audience and building up credibility and relevance. I mean, if you take our situation at Songtradr, that there are jobs that we pitch for where potentially we're going up hundreds of other tracks will be going in for the same brief. So one of the things that our team are doing is trying to give more context to that piece of music beyond just an audio file, which the supervisor may or may not listen to or may not like. So I think that idea about having an audience, having relevance, having kind of points of interest that you can refer to, either whether that's as an artist or the people that are pitching that artist, feels like it's really important.
And Jonathan, you mentioned that artists should be very prepared before reaching out. What should artists never do as well when communicating with you or a music supervisor?
Like I said, take presumptions that they know better and they, here's a song I wrote about fire and it should be played on Chicago Fire. Like those kind of things are just dumb and people think that they're smart because it sounds smart, but it doesn't. So a lot of it is just about understanding who you're dealing with. It's very hard to know what people are working on. So it's very hard to hit that nail on the head, but if you see a certain show and you see that it's all hip hop, then don't send them, rock music or vice versa. You kind of have to understand the research. And, every time you see a show, buried in the credits somewhere is the music supervisor at the end, super quick. So you got to freeze frame that because it goes pretty quick. Or you go to this a platform called IMDb, which stands for Internet Movie Database. And that has most of the credits of what people are working on. People pretty much religiously update their credits to keep up on stuff. So those are two good tools to just literally watch the shows, watch the movies, and figure out. It's very hard to figure out what music supervisors like because we like what we have to like. We like what is up for that show. So I'm doing one show that's predominantly Bay Area hip hop right now called Blind Spotting, but yet I'm doing another animated comedy that is everything from 60s music to modern day hip hop. So you just never know what people are working on, and you have to really try to pigeonhole as much as you can and figure out how your music might actually work with the projects they're working on.
Would you say, though, that music supervisors get known for a specific aesthetic or a taste or a style?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain supervisors like, let's call it Matt Sullivan and Steve Gazicki that are doing all the biggest musicals out there. They're spending a year, 2 years on a project on one film. And those guys have become like the musical go-to guys. And so that's that. And then you get, supervisors that, do one show and then they get another show and that feels like that. And then they become, like Jen Malone did Atlanta. And then she did, what's a show with Zendaya?
I really want to help. I can see it.
Yeah, that one. Anyway, yeah. So but the point is, but she does so much more than that. You know what I mean? It just, you get in one lane and then you get hit with a couple different things. So everybody's like, oh, get me the person that does Atlanta. I want to do that show. I want to do a show. I got a show like that. So it's all relative, and there's a lot of us are very versatile, whether it's films, documentaries, TV, advertising, video games. The skill is the skill, and it's really just applicable in all those different formats and areas.
Amazing. So, Nick, what would you say an artist should not do when they're negotiating a license? Let's say they've gone through the first bit and we're up to the license bit.
So again, I'm probably not the foremost expert in this, simply because in the situations that I've worked in, the artist is never negotiating the license direct. But I obviously read your notes, and my thought on this was kind of 101 of licensing or negotiation is that part of it is around building credibility and trust, because it's not just about extracting maximum value from that one deal, but it's also around your ability to build a career or to build a relationship with an important stakeholder. So one of the things that would seem really important to me is to not pull the rug from under anyone's feet. So the idea of kind of changing terms or pulling out at the last minute, or declaring that there are different writers that weren't originally on the list when you were first talking about the deal. I think it's that ability to be trustworthy and transparent with the people that you're dealing with. But Jonathan, I'd be interested to hear your take on that in terms of, have you ever encountered any of those situations where the goalposts have been moved late in the day?
I'm coming off a thing recently where, so recently, that a hip hop artist that we had one line of dialogue from in a show, verbally kind of approved on text, couldn't get the guy to sign a piece of paper for 3 months. Then all of a sudden his lawyer got into it after we sent him a note saying, hey, need to get this done. Don't think we'll be using any of your music for the next season, for this season. He sent back an offer that was 3 times the amount. So I just sent back a scathing letter to them and said, yeah, we'll pay this. We'll pay this amount if that's what you want, but don't, we're not using your music anymore, ever. And so then I got a response from the publisher saying, we'll come back with a counter offer. So it's like that kind of shit just doesn't resonate well. And so that person, if I can never use that person again, they're done with me. So it's a cautionary tale of, if you can't get yourself together, and this artist is not a household name by any stretch. If the artist is a household name, you have to suffer those slings and arrows necessarily of dealing with that if you really want that copyright. But so yeah, it's artists need to have themselves buttoned up to be handled by the right people. Had that person just let the publisher deal with it, it would have been fine, but they wouldn't sign the document that they needed to sign, and the publisher couldn't sign on their behalf. So that was a miss on all of their parts, because, now you're less likely to use that artist for sure. And, not like you would shy away from the publisher because they weren't really controlling it. But to me, they certainly didn't handle it well.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that, would you say that it's better for artists to license many small tracks for smaller amounts and then leverage those wins, or just wait for that big white whale?
No, there's no such thing as a big white whale. As you know, nobody's really seen them since the book Moby Dick came out in the 1800s, and nobody's even confirmed that happened. So Herman Melville might have seen one, but that's a long time ago now. So no, I explained to artists like, that's not enough money. I was like, really? Because that's $500 more than you had yesterday. And you can also take that piece of music marketing and piece of placement and market it. So take the money. Don't be precious. Maybe you are getting ripped off. It's all relative. How much would you pay them to put your music in so that you could market yourself around that show? What's that worth to you? And so you got to flip the mentality on people sometimes, but people just don't know. So that's a big problem too. So this is why these things that you guys do to educate people are super important for young artists out there, because, again, the good news for us is that we don't necessarily care what you look like, who you are, where you live. It's how good is your music, how good does it fit into our programs, and how easy are you to deal with. One of my class I taught last semester, one of my supervisors, Amanda Krieg Thomas, had a great slogan in her book, which she wrote, which I used as a textbook, and it was, be an effing pleasure to deal with. And my students that was like the one thing, the biggest takeaway for the whole year. And I thought it was a great takeaway because this guy I just referenced before was not that, right? He was not a pleasure to deal with. He was 18 texts over 3 months to get that thing back. It's exactly what I'm not looking for. You know what I mean? It's quintessential example of what we do not need.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we know that the industry can move quite quickly. So what would you recommend for artists to always have prepared if they're pitching their music for replacement?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, you need instrumentals of all your tracks. The next level of that is what's called a TV track. TV track is the instrumental with the choruses and maybe the background vocals. So the verses a lot of times can't fit into shows or movies, but the chorus can, and maybe the chorus can, but the instrumental can, and you can ramp up the instrumental and down as you need it. The next level is having stems, which are basically all the different elements of your music, a vocal separated from guitar, from bass, from horns, from keyboard. That's a rare extreme where they'll need stems, but if you don't have them, you look like you're not as prepared. The most important thing, metadata. Whenever you send anybody any music, make sure your metadata is all together. I'll tackle the definition of metadata after I'm done because it's a lengthy one, but it's super important. So all those kind of things are really the key to have. And as I said, be a pleasure to deal with. Don't try to over negotiate. Don't try to over lawyer things. Don't spend money on a lawyer if it's like a small use and it's not that complicated. Maybe ask somebody who knows it better than you, the licensing firm, just so you feel that you are not getting victimized, if you will. But those are kind of my key points. Nick, you want to tackle metadata for a second?
Yeah, that's definitely part of my world. So metadata being like the underlying information that exists alongside the track. There's probably two main forms in my world, at least. There's the kind of what I call the front of house metadata. So that would be things like who's the writer, who are the performers, which societies represent those artists or those writers. And this is very important for the likes of Songtradr. There's the kind of underlying metadata, such as things like moods, themes, genres. And that means that when it's existing alongside a lot of other music, it makes it much easier to surface it through search engines. So the ability for a producer to go and find a happy, uplifting pop track, that all of that metadata supports that search.
Amazing. And this could be opening a can of worms, but where do you think that improvements could be made in the sync industry?
When you say movements, can you define that?
Are there any areas in the sync industry where you feel there are inefficiencies, or where you feel that there could be more transparency, or things that would make the whole ecosystem work a little better or more efficient?
I think two things have come up in the last 6 months or so. One is that BMI and ASCAP now have a shared Songfind, I think it's called Songfind site, which I thought that was incredibly, because that's always been a hassle. Where's their record from? Is it on BMI? Is it on ASCAP? So now there's one site you can go to and they kind of filter the data from each other. So I thought that was good. Another is about how you move music around. And an Australian music supervisor named Carl created a little thing called Disco, which has been really great to be able to move music around, and a lot of people have embraced it. So those are two things that have come along. There's also another format I like called Trivana Tracks, and Trivana Tracks is it's a much better version of you creating a Google Doc to track your projects. So for people looking to track projects, the Guild is recently, we're using it on our award show for clearances and licenses this year. So those are three things over the last 6 months, and they have big clients, Trivana Tracks, so they've been working at it for years. But those are three things over the last little while that I think have been nice improvements to the game. The next one would be better information from unions about reuse costs and what those are, what they have to deal with, what they're going to cost music supervisors, a clearer path, and getting that information about because the concept of reuse is if a record was recorded under union obligations and there was orchestra on there or just X amount of musicians with health and welfare for benefits, there's an extra fee now that's due to license a song. And the labels do not tell you what that is. Once you license, they do put in their licenses now that there may be a fee. But to have more transparency with unions, I think would be the next level of thing. And that's something that the Guild of Music Supervisors is working on to help clear those things up. Great.
Nick, anything else?
So I'll take a slightly different track. For me, it would be the global performing rights organizations. So I probably need to explain a little bit about those. So it goes all the way back to the beginning where we were talking about the master rights and the publishing rights, so that the written music. Global PROs, there's normally one per country, although in some countries like the US, there are many or several. And their responsibility is to collect royalties every time a piece of music is performed in public. The two areas that relate to sync that I think would be just huge improvements. One relates to broadcast on TV. So still around the world, the majority of the systems are based on paper declarations, which means that if you are syndicated on a big show that goes out to 70 territories, in theory, that's very lucrative for the writers. That's a significant part of their earning potential. But they're still reliant on a piece of paper making its way around to each of those 70 territories and being paid accurately and fairly. And often in many cases, when it goes out into like secondary markets, the lag of payment can be anything up to 18 months after the air date. The second piece, which is mainly online content, less so for the larger platforms, like a Netflix, for example, that has the kind of the resources to actually go out and negotiate individually with each of those PROs. But particularly for things like business use, the fact that you can't clear global public performance in a kind of one-stop way, that you have to, in theory, go out to every single country and negotiate separate licenses. It's really bad for the end user. It's a really poor customer experience, but it's also putting a massive barrier in the way for artists and writers to actually get paid fairly for their works. So for me, that would be the one huge fundamental that would be a massive change for the industry.
Nick, what do you see? Changing that? What do you see can happen to change that?
I mean, I think on the first point, the digitization of reporting and collection is happening, not necessarily at pace, but it's more than glacial now. And certainly in the bigger markets, there's been a kind of a strong uptake of systems like TuneSat or BMAT that do a lot of fingerprinting technology for automated reporting. So it feels like in that space, things are improving, and there's lots of, pan-territorial deals. So certainly in the European market, you can do a kind of single license for all of your European broadcasts now. The online piece, I think, is really difficult because ultimately it's a political question. I think there's a lot of big societies around the world who see their kind of preeminence in their local markets as being at threat if they were to allow something like a global license. And I think the fear would be that the likes of an ASCAP would come and eat their lunch. So I think because of the political nature of it, it's very difficult to see actually how that's going to improve for the best. But it certainly would be a huge welcome from my side if there were to be a way through.
And this is something we could probably have a whole new show about. But for now, we're going to take a break and come back soon. We're talking about the fundamentals of sync licensing with Jonathan McHugh and Nick Woolard. It's time for In 5 Words or Less. Jonathan and Nick, I'm going to read out some quick questions for you, and we're looking for your answers in 5 words or less, if you can, and I know you can. We'll go Jonathan first.
Is there a penalty to go to 6 or 7?
I guess we'd need to decide what the penalty is.
Yeah. All right, let's try 5. We'll try for brevity.
Okay, we'll try for 5. All right, so I'll ask a question, and Jonathan go first, then Nick. Question, Jonathan, Nick. All right, how's that sound? Okay, good. First question. First song you loved?
First single I ever bought was In the Year 2525 by Zager and Evans.
That's 5. And Nick?
Papa Don't Preach by Madonna.
Proudest career moment?
Jeez, man. I still hasn't happened yet, I guess. I don't know. I've had so many. That's a hard one to pin down.
If you had to choose one.
I don't know, maybe producing my first movie, Britney Spears movie, Crossroads. That would probably be, because that was a big dovetail in the road. I wanted to produce movies. So producing the movie Crossroads.
Very nice. Nick?
Mine's definitely more of an internal focus of seeing younger team members build great careers. So let's go with that. Younger team members build careers.
I love the whole ramp up, and then it's like explaining and then bringing it back down to 5 words. All right, Jonathan, biggest career faux pas?
I think on that movie, the Britney Spears movie, I did tell, I don't want to, not the truth, but I didn't communicate effectively, and that was a great learning lesson. Learning lesson on Crossroads.
I love it. It's your biggest career moment and your biggest faux pas. How's that? Nick?
Misquoted in the press.
That can happen.
Okay. And Jonathan, you just mentioned communicating. And the next question is, what is your favorite way of communicating?
Old school, speaking on the phone or in person.
Nick?
Hug it out. Very tactile person.
I miss those days, Nick.
Me too.
So weird, man. Like you see, like I saw somebody yesterday. I was like, you want to hug them goodbye? And you're like, let me wait on that.
Become the master of the Zoom high five, which
Right.
quite cut the mustard, but
I'll give you one right now if you like.
Back at you, kids.
There you go. All right. Next question. Must have when at work?
Music.
strong coffee.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
A film director.
Okay.
I am. So that's working out.
I'm struggling to do the 5 questions now. Promo guy on Sky Sports.
What did your parents want you to be?
Actually, I'll take that back. Second baseman, New York Yankees, if you're going to go there, Nick.
Oh, I love it. Okay. Yeah, we can accommodate changes. And then what did your parents want you to be?
You know, my parents were both artists, so we never really did have that conversation because they died too early. But I would say just have some level of creativity in your life.
Oh, man, so good. Nick?
Absolutely no idea.
That's under 5 words. Thank you. All right, Jonathan, what's your nickname?
Q. That's one letter.
I love it.
That's
Nick?
I made up for giving a bunch of extra words. I come back with just one letter.
Good. Very good. Thank you for accommodating. Nick?
I've got a few, but my childhood one was KD.
Oh, Lang. No.
Nothing with Wooly in the title?
No, there was Wellard, which was the Alsatian dog on our soap EastEnders, which my school friends used to call me. But KD was my family nickname, named after Kerry Dixon, who used to play centre forward for Chelsea in the 80s.
Very nice. Jonathan, your relaxation go-to?
Beach.
Nick?
I was in Malibu yesterday. It's heaven.
Running.
What soundtrack or placement do you wish you could have worked on?
One of the greatest placements I never did that I always loved was the season and show finale of the show 6 Feet Under that Thomas and Gary found Sia song Breathe, which basically she had been dropped as an artist and gave her career back. And she credits them for that. And she's done okay since then.
Very nice. Nick?
I would say anything by Arcade Fire. I just think the music lends itself so well to picture, and it's something that happens very rarely. So I would love to have been in the position to have done that.
Okay. Wow. Next one. All right. So the last question here, what is one common characteristic that makes for a talented music supervisor, do we think?
I think it's a mix of, 5 words. Creativity, organization, communication skills, and vision.
Very good. Nick?
I can't really argue with the music supervisor on those points. I think this is something for anyone. It's humble as well, and not just specifically music supervisors, but I think bringing a little bit of humbleness to any process feels like an important one.
All right, last question. What soundtrack best describes your life?
Is it one that I did or anyone?
Oh, it could be anyone, but whichever one you like.
I don't know about best describes your life. That's a little amorphous for me. A couple of my favorites that I did would be Empire Records, Rush Hour, Money Talks, Austin Powers. I don't know if I said that right. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a hard one because I've produced like 100 soundtracks, so it's hard to think about.
Oh, I love Austin Powers. Yeah, baby. Nick?
I really struggle to answer that question, Vic. I just really can't think of any one thing that I could pin down on 40 years worth of living.
Oh, gosh. I was going to try, but is that like a pass?
Yeah, I think so. We answered, we did a thing internally recently about like a band or an artist that you would use to soundtrack the end of your personal career or like your film of your life. And for some reason, Chemical Brothers came into my mind at the time. I just think that there's something quite cinematic and quite uplifting about their music. So it's slightly off skew, but that would be my answer, I think.
That works for me. And we're going to take a break now. Welcome back. We're with Jonathan McHugh and Nick Woolard to tackle the topic of sync licensing. It's now time for You Asked, where we answer questions from our community. And the first question is, it's difficult to get a foot in the door. And this one is from Neil Sawyer. So should artists offer independent productions use of songs without licensing fees for the sake of exposure? Who wants to take that one?
So my gratis uses? I'm not crazy about gratis uses. I like to pay artists something. And so I don't ever really ask for gratis unless it's fundamentally impossible not to pay any money. So I think in any scenario, the answer is always yes. But you try to get some money for your work, even if it's $1 sometimes, just to say you got paid for it.
Yeah. Nick?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that was, I guess, driven by the production music world, where with a lot of the broadcasters, there were low dollar or no dollar license fees. In those cases, those companies were really well set up to collect the publishing, and they could actually make a good assessment of what the publishing revenue was likely to be. So I think in those cases, there's much more of an argument for that type of model. I would personally feel deeply uncomfortable if that was something that was happening regularly. Again, going back to what Jonathan said, in certain cases, if there really isn't budget available for a certain project, then maybe, but it wouldn't be something that I'd be sort of trying to encourage as a kind of regular occurrence.
I'm sure artists would be very happy to hear that from the both of you. This next question comes from Brian Barn. He wants to know how to write a pitch letter without sounding pushy.
Good question. I think, as I said, the more educated and researched you can appear to be, that the supervisor's work, and you're a fan of something for a certain reason, and that doesn't sound too sycophantic, so to speak. But yet, you want to let people know that you can help them by providing music for them. Because again, what is it that's going to get our attention of the thousands of emails that people get a week, supervisors, that people pitching blindly? So it's like that line from Spinal Tap. You know, there's a thin line between clever and stupid. So you need to be somewhere in that middle ground.
Yeah. So not that line where he says it's all about the doubly.
Correct. Not that one.
Thank you. All right. I just wanted to get that.
It's good that you got it, though. You know, you got a line there from that movie.
It's amazing. Here's one I prepared earlier. All right, Nick, how to write a pitch letter without sounding pushy.
Just going to reference your great lock stock impression there, Vic. There's a good bit of accent going on. Listen, can't really add much more to what Jonathan's already said, other than it all comes down to tone, to being humble, the thin line of trying to put some personality, stroke humor into what you communicate without it coming across as being, too, I guess, unprofessional in that regard. But ultimately, I think anyone respects someone who's being mildly pushy for the sake of their career, as long as they don't step over the line of being disrespectful or too pushy or not taking no for an answer.
Okay. And how long after we send the first email or communication should they follow up?
I'd say like 2 weeks. If you don't hear anything back, see if you can get one more response. A lot of times I miss emails, and, a lot of times I just can't respond to blind stuff and listen to blind stuff. It's just too much. So it's really just a catch as catch can. Personal references are always important when someone knows somebody else. That's really important. Personal introductions from other people make you want to have to read it and respond. So if you can ever find that connection to somebody else, that's super important. And that's where the third party sync agencies come in handy, or an organization like Songtradr who has relationships.
Good point. Nick, 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, it's like any kind of sales cycle. 2 weeks kind of feels pretty decent. I'd also say it's like there is a bit of a numbers game to it, both in terms of the kind of mass audience of, the more people that you reach out to, the more likely you are to get some kind of response. But equally, if someone's not got back to you in that kind of first couple of attempts, I think it's perfectly reasonable to go back to them thereafter, whether that's 3 months later or 6 months later. Like, sometimes you make your own luck in terms of timing, and it could just be that there's a particular project or a particular need at that time that suddenly makes that communication way more relevant than it might have been a year ago.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
a good point. Relevance is super important.
Yeah. All right. So this one comes from Mateus Lacerda. He wants to know, does the artist's design have a significant influence, or is what really matters the way the music sounds?
I mean, at the end of the day, it's all music, how it sounds. But the first thing you do see when you're on YouTube or you're on Spotify, you stumble across something or you're looking for some things, is visual. So the visuals do matter greatly. The aesthetic of your art matters greatly, but nothing substitutes for what it sounds like.
Amazing answer. Nick?
Nothing more to add on that. Completely agree.
Yeah, perfect. So from Jerome Davis, he wants to know, I think music structure / format is a huge hurdle for most. Can you discuss that in Happy Hour?
Wait, one more time on that one.
I think music structure or format is a huge hurdle for most. So I think he wants to know about the importance of structuring your music.
Well, I mean, there's a traditional song, three verses and chorus and pre-chorus. I mean, that's the structure of a song, but not everything has to be that way. And a lot of times we can't even use a whole song or even a part of the song. So it's really about the catchiness of it. And, supervisors listen to so much music. Whatever your first 10 to 15 seconds is, it's got to grab people. And that's really, that's a classic case of first appearances do matter, right? Your first 15 seconds, if it's meandering, it doesn't, you can't quite know where it is. Like, if you could hit people off the bat and go, my song is this in 15 seconds of vibe-wise, that's going to help me stay in there and keep listening and go, maybe if I took this piece and put it here. Like, you have to start conceptualizing the music for where you need to put it. So I think that's a key thing. Not necessarily structure, but intro in a way to capture people.
Yeah. Nick?
So I think this talks to maybe some of the differences between a commercial track, a track that's been written for the sake of an audience listening to it first and foremost, that then go on to have a sync life, versus a track that's been written for media use. So typically in a kind of production library world, and obviously, there are many different genres that are represented, but there was definitely a kind of classic that you would expect a song to kind of have a kind of slow, steady build up to a crescendo and then a nice drop off. And then sort of there'll be a sort of like happy kind of level towards the last 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And that meant that those tracks were very versatile when it came to editing, that they were quite predictable, and an editor could kind of chop them up a little bit and kind of move them around a scene at ease. So I think that if you're working in a library space, then there's definitely something to be said about a kind of structure that's typical in that regard.
And I would also add to that, Nick, that, changes in a song, much like in any score piece, are things that you need to have, the highs and lows of a song. Like I said, that people talk about the drop in a traditional song setting. Those things are incredibly needed to be connected to film and TV and the visual media spectrum. And that's whenever you're making anything, don't just make it sound too samey, right? Give it some lift and some dip and some vibe. And, so it's figuring out how to get that kind of changes that make it really a unique listening experience for people.
Yeah, and to that point, I actually know editors who would be able to at least do a first selection of tracks based on the waveform alone. So maybe listen to the first 15 seconds, but they could quickly rule a track in or out based on the shape of the waveform. Yeah, which, obviously, these are people that are doing that kind of maybe working with, several hundred tracks in any kind of session. So I guess there's a high level of familiarity there. But then I'd say on the kind of converse side of that, and this is definitely the space that we occupy at Songtradr, is a lot of it comes down to being authentic. Like one of the big things that we put in front of any music supervisor or any broadcaster or any ad agency is around the authenticity of the music. And some of that is around making it non-formulaic, and meaning that it's actually a true representation of that person's art and the genres that art comes from. And I think there's a lot to be said for that as well, particularly if you are essentially writing that music as an artist, and sync is just one part of the overall kind of economic model.
Yeah, and I think to Nick's point, you don't want to try to be too clever to be sync friendly. You really want an artist to make their art, and hopefully it fits in with the projects that you're looking at.
Absolutely. From Miller Promise, how do they, I think you guys, license songs? Why is the licensing so important? I'm not sure what aspect.
Well, it's important in the sense that everything's got to be buttoned up. So you have to be able to speak for your art and represent it on a financial and economic model that, because we can't, that's the rubber meets the road for us. We may like a song plenty, but if your shit is not together, so to speak, it doesn't really matter. We have to walk away and move on to the next. So music licenses, again, there's everything to hearing the music, but if I can't clear it, it doesn't matter to me. It becomes more frustrating than anything, and it's something I would never go back to again.
Right, Nick?
Listen, it's the same as like any contract, isn't it? It's ultimately there to protect the kind of economic and moral interests of all the parties. So as a producer, as a film producer, I want to know that I can use that track safely, that I've got the right kind of indemnities, that when I need to put it onto DVD or I'm going to stream it on Netflix, I'm not suddenly going to get bitten because I haven't cleared those rights. And ultimately, as an artist or a songwriter, I want to know that I'm going to get paid fairly for my work. And I want to make sure that I have control over how and when it's used.
Well, fantastic information and insights, both of you, Jonathan and Nick. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us, Victoria. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vic. I'm going to do some big virtual hugging from the other side of the world.
Here we come. We're getting in there.
This is where it all goes downhill. And to everyone out there, thanks so much for tuning in. As always, we hope you've enjoyed Happy Hour and found it very valuable. Let us know in the comments what you would like to see going forward, and we will see you soon. Cheers.
Bye.